Jaehaerys II Targaryen ascended the Iron Throne in 259 AC after his father, King Aegon V, and much of House Targaryen were killed in the infamous tragedy of Summerhall. It is believed that his father had gathered the family at Summerhall for two reasons: to celebrate the impending birth of his first great-grandchild, with Jaehaerys' son Aenys and his sister wife Princess Rhaella nearing ever closer to her expected time, but also it is believed to bring back the power of Old Valyria, the might that is a dragon. All we know for sure is during this process, a fire became uncontrollable and reduced Summerhall to nothing but a burned husk of a once beautiful palace. We cannot know for sure how King Jaehaerys survived and escaped the fire that killed so many others, but it is believed by some that Lord Commander of the Kingsguard Sir Duncan the Tall was instrumental in the escape of Princess Rhaella from the blaze before losing his own life. It is not so brash to assume that he too could have played a role in the likes of the escape of Prince Aerys and King Jaehaerys himself, and maybe even the new Queen Sarah. Little did anyone know at the time how significant Summerhall would be in the fate of House Targaryen in years to come, and even more the heroic actions of Sir Duncan the Tall in saving the pregnant Rhaella. It is believed that as the fire raged around Summerhall, the princess went into labour and gave birth to a healthy son she and Aerys named Rhaegar. And it seemed at the time to many, despite the tragic deaths of so many members of the House of the Dragon, that the future of the royal line was secure in Jaehaerys, Aerys, and Rhaegar. In truth, as those who know their history well will attest to, King Jaehaerys II, like his father and grandfather, was never meant to be king. He was the third king in a row whom was never expected to sit the Iron Throne at his birth. However, where this was part of the issue that plagued his father, King Aegon the Unlikely, throughout his reign, it was not so much an issue for Jaehaerys, as unlike his father, he became heir at a young enough age to prepare him somewhat for the duties that were expected of him as king. In the year 237 AC, his elder brother, the Prince of Dragonstone, Prince Duncan Targaryen, broke his marriage pact and married a common girl known only to the history books as Jenny of Oldstones. While King Aegon and his small council did try multiple times to talk seemingly common sense into Prince Duncan to set aside the marriage and keep his pact, King Aegon V eventually relented, with the caveat that Prince Duncan abdicate his position as heir in favour of his younger brother Jaehaerys. The new heir was 12 years of age when his brother abdicated. While not raised as heir since birth, his young age still allowed enough time for him to prepare for his future as king. With Jaehaerys being 34 years of age when he became king, it means he spent 22 years as heir. So, while not being first choice, he never faced the issue his father did when he came to the throne with his ascension, albeit earlier than anyone would have really liked. But the idea of him being king was not unexpected. In fact, many lords who had personal issues with the rule of King Aegon V, especially his reforms that favoured the rights of the small folk, may have been glad to see the rise of King Jaehaerys II. It also feels prudent at this stage to point out that his namesake, the famous Old King, King Jaehaerys I, the Conciliator, was no more a boy of 14 when he came to the Iron Throne, and there were many who hoped that, like his namesake, Jaehaerys II would bring a new age of peace and prosperity to the Seven Kingdoms. Sadly, in a twist of fate, this was not to be, and Westeros would soon be heading down a new road altogether. King Jaehaerys was born in 225 AC and was the second child of the then Prince Aegon Targaryen and his wife, Betha Blackwood. Even as a babe, it is said that Jaehaerys was sickly looking, pale and frail, and in turn, he grew into a man who was sickly, pale and frail, often getting ill. He had large eyes, the purple of Old Valyria, and shoulder-length silver hair, a much more traditional Targaryen look than his elder brother, Prince Duncan. He suffered from numerous ailments throughout his life. However, our current records do not go into detail about the specifics of this. Many felt that Jaehaerys was an amiable and clever man, and of course, there would be those that doubted him due to his sickly appearance, betraying weakness. There were also many lords who believed, given his nature, he had the makings of a good king given time. Jaehaerys strangely wore a cape that concealed one arm. While we have no firm sources, it is believed he was not the perfect specimen of Old Valyria that people had come to expect from House Targaryen, more gods than mortal men, and that he bore some kind of deformity to his arm he wished to keep hidden away to preserve preserve the perception of House Targaryen's godhood his namesake had worked so hard to create. His crown was a red gold band with black iron points, the same crown worn by his grandfather, King Maekar, before him. There has also been some debate among the maesters of the Citadel around the idea that his marriage to his sister, Princess Sarah, gave any indication as to if Jaehaerys would become a good or bad king. When Jaehaerys married his sister in 240 AC, both he and Sarah had been betrothed to Celia Tully and Luthor Tyrell, respectively, since 237 AC. When Prince Duncan broke his betrothal to the daughter of Lord Lionel Baratheon in 239 AC to marry Jenny of Oldstones, Prince Jaehaerys and Princess Sarah took note, especially when their father relented to his son's will. It was clear to many at court that both Jaehaerys and Sarah desired each other, and there were efforts to keep them apart. But in 240 AC, Jaehaerys and Sarah followed in Duncan's footsteps. They eluded their guardians and secretly wed and consummated the marriage before anyone knew what they had done. King Aegon despaired over this, but felt he had no choice in the matter as the marriage had been consummated. He was forced to relent to his children's wishes once again, while at the same time dealing with the anger and wounded pride of both House Tully and Tyrell. Some have argued that Jaehaerys' actions in marrying his sister without the consent of their father show a steel and determination needed to be an effective king, while on the contrary, others argue it showed a level of selfishness and arrogance, with Jaehaerys doing what is best for him and not what was best for the realm, as a king should do. But the reality of this is it would likely have had a little bearing on his reign either way. But there was one other event that did lead some at court to question the wisdom of the then heir, when he married his two children, Aerys and Rhaella, together, a match neither wanted or was suited for, with both fiercely protesting it. All of this came to be under the advice of a woods witch Jenny of Oldstones had brought to court. This woods witch had told Jaehaerys of a prophecy of the prince that was promised that he foolishly believed, that resulted in his choice to marry his son and daughter together. While some do point to the lack of wisdom in this, there are also those who suggest this very act showed the king as a hypocrite, forcing his children to wed when he defied his father to pursue a love match. While Jaehaerys' rise to the Iron Throne was expected in 259 AC at the death of his father at Summerhall, there were still many questions as to what kind of king he would become, given how as heir he had shown qualities both good and bad. King Jaehaerys II Targaryen and his queen, his sister Sarah, had two children. The first was born in the year 244 AC, a son they named Aerys. He was soon followed by sister Rhaella, who was born between the years 245 and 247 AC. Little did anyone know at the time, at the birth of Aerys and Rhaella, the vital role they would play in the final years of the Targaryen dynasty, even though it should be fair to recall it was the actions of their father, King Jaehaerys II, which perhaps shaped their future and forced this path upon his children. The fate of Westeros and that of House Targaryen could well have been very different if Jaehaerys had allowed his children the kind of freedom of choice he was so lucky to have been given by his father, King Aegon V, even if, in truth, Jaehaerys had forced his father's hand in the matter. Prince Aerys was a handsome young man, with purple eyes and the gold silver hair, the perfect example of a Targaryen prince and the blood of old Valyria. There were supposedly some private concerns at court around the time of Aerys' birth. He might be born with the rumoured similar deformities of his father, but evidently, even if the tales of Jaehaerys' deformed arm was true, it had no ill effect on his children. But Aerys was more than just a prime physical example of the perfect Targaryen prince. In his youth, Aerys was said to have an undeniable charm and a sharp sense of humour. He was generous, resolute and ambitious. He liked music, dancing, masked balls and young women. However, at the same time, Aerys was not the most intelligent or most diligent person and was somewhat quick to anger. He was vain, proud and changeable, which made him an easy target for lickspittles and flatterers. But on balance, Aerys at the time seemed like the kind of heir any king would want to follow him. Aerys had a small but close circle of friends that he trusted implicitly since his youth. During his formative years, he befriended the young heir to Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister, who served as a page at the royal court. Aerys also later befriended the heir to Storm's End, his cousin Steffon Baratheon. If tales are to be believed, Aerys, Tywin and Steffon became inseparable, and many believed the future of House Targaryen looked bright with Aerys one day sat upon the Iron Throne, with the future lords Casterly Rock and Storm's End by his side. His sister, Rhaella Targaryen, too, was said to be the perfect example of the blood of old Valyria, with the traditional violet eyes and silver hair. It is said that Rhaella was always mindful of her duty to her family and to the realm that her position had afforded her, even if what was being asked of her was explicitly not of her own choosing or her own will. While we know little of her early life, with many contemporary history books giving more focus on her elder brother Aerys, there is a widely circulated rumour that Princess Rhaella had been in love with a young landed knight, Sir Boniver Hasty, who hailed from the Stormlands in her youth, a man well below Rhaella's position. While this is a widely circulated rumour, there are very few first-hand accounts related to their relationship, but what we can say is Boniver did wear her favour in tourneys, and in one instance, managed to defeat all challengers to name her his Queen of Love and Beauty. The exact nature of their relationship is not known to us. While some would simply call it an infatuation, there are those who will call it an affair. No matter the truth, if the latter were in fact true, we have no record of it, and most likely one would not exist in order to protect the princess from scandalous rumours. After Rhaella's betrothal was announced, it is said that Hasty gave up tourney jousting, calling it a show of vanity and hollow. He would fall deeply into religion, stating only the maiden could replace Rhaella in his heart. Later he would go on to form a salsal company, known as the Holy Hundred. The lives of both Aerys and Rhaella would take a dramatic turn when their uncle, Prince Duncan, brought his wife, the common-born Jenny of Oldstones, to court. With them came a woods witch, known as the Ghost of High Heart. The witch told of a prophecy of the prince that was promised, and said prince would be born from the line of Aerys and Rhaella. Most at court dismissed the prophecy as the words of a madwoman, but for whatever reason, the then Prince Jaehaerys believed this woods witch and decided to betroth his son and daughter together. There was likely some pushback from Aerys and Rhaella respectively to the match, with some reports suggesting they had always bore a dislike for one another. The legendary Kingsguard knight Sir Barristan Selmy, who was present at the wedding, stated that on the day of their marriage, neither of the pair looked particularly happy, and there was no fondness between Aerys and Rhaella. This marriage was very much forced upon them, which is something many point to as a failing of Jaehaerys, given he was allowed to forge his own path in life, even against the will of his father. The same very much could not be said for his children. Aerys and Rhaella had their first child, a boy named Rhaegar, in 259 AC, as the fires of Summerhall raged around them. That very night, their father had become king, as much of House Targaryen was lost in the flames. While married life was always going to be a challenge for Aerys and Rhaella, they had done their duty, even if it was not of their own volition. With the birth of their first son, Prince Rhaegar, it did seem for a while that the future of House Targaryen seemed secure, and maybe this prophesied prince that was promised would truly come from Aerys' line, be that Rhaegar, or perhaps even Rhaegar's children. But as things stand, the reality is we will never know the answer to that question. Westeros had a new king, a new heir, and a new future with the birth of Rhaegar. But finally, in the year 260 AC, the Black Dragon of House Blackfyre across the Narrow Sea would make its move. In the aftermath of Summerhall, Meleys Blackfyre, Meleys the Monstrous, and the Band of 9 set sail from the Stepstones to bring blood and fire to Westeros in this last grasp of the fire that was House Blackfyre in the War of the Nine Penny Kings, a war that would not just impact the realm during its time, but for decades to come, as friends were made and alliances formed that all set the stage for the downfall of House Targaryen. In the year 260 AC, King Jaehaerys II Targaryen had known that Meleys Blackfyre and the Band of 9 meant to win the Seven Kingdoms for Meleys, who had already declared himself King Meleys I Blackfyre. But like his father, King Aegon V, Jaehaerys had hoped that the alliance of rogues would founder in Essos, or fall at the hands of some alliance amongst the free cities. But as the free cities squabbled amongst themselves, each more interested in their own self-preservation, no alliance was formed. Thus, Meleys' path to the Seven Kingdoms had been cleared. Now the moment was at hand. As war quickly approached, did the weakness of House Targaryen's position start to rear its head. King Aegon V had died trying to hatch dragons, burning Summerhall to the ground along with most of the royal family. Prince Duncan lost his life in the fire, and Aegon's third son, Prince Daeron, whom was a splendid knight, had died years before in battle, leaving only Jaehaerys, the least martial of Aegon's three sons, and the least well-suited to fight a war. War approached so rapidly after the ascension of Jaehaerys, he hardly had time to prepare himself for the challenges that were about to come. The new king was 34 years of age when he sat the Iron Throne for the first time. No one would have called him formidable or an imposing figure. Not the kind of man to inspire great acts of courage. Unlike his brothers, Jaehaerys was thin, scrawny, and had battled various ailments and illnesses all of his life. In fact, some had pointed out his speculated deformed arm could be the reason as to why he took little interest in learning the ways of war as a young man. While he did not inspire courage, in truth, he did not lack courage himself, or intelligence. Even if King Jaehaerys was not ready for war, it was lucky for the realm that his father had begun to broadly plan the defence of the realm in the event the Band of Nine ever did make it to the shores of Westeros. Drawing on his father's plans, Jaehaerys put aside his grief for the loss of so many of his close kin, called his lords bannermen, and resolved to meet the Ninepenny Kings upon the Stepstones, choosing to take the war to them rather than awaiting their landing on the shores of the Seven Kingdoms proper. The king had intended to lead the attack upon the Ninepenny Kings himself, but his hand, Lord Ormond Baratheon, persuaded him that it would be unwise, given his lack of experience at war. The king was not used to the rigours of campaign and not skilled in arms, the hand pointed out, and it would be a folly to risk losing him in battle so soon after the tragedy of Summerhall, that the event of the king's death in itself could cause some lords to look to Meleys as a viable option as king. Jaehaerys finally allowed himself to be persuaded to remain at King's Landing with his queen Sarah, his daughter Rhaella, and his infant grandson Rhaegar, who had been born as the fires at Summerhall raged. Command of the host was given to Lord Ormond as the hand of the king, a man more capable of leading the united army of Westeros against a formidable foe. Later that year, Lord Ormond landed Targaryen armies upon 3 of the Stepstones, and the War of the Ninepenny Kings turned into one of the bloodiest conflicts since the Redgrass Field during the first Blackfyre Rebellion. The task force included a fleet of 100 longships, led by Quellan Greyjoy, Lord of the Iron Islands, and a force of 1,000 knights and 10,000 men-at-arms sent by Lord Titus Lannister from the Westerlands, under the leadership of his younger brother, Sir Jason Lannister. House Martell also sent spears from Dorne, and great lords and small from up and down Westeros sent what men they could. Battle raged across the islands and the channels between for most of that year, with for a long time the balance of power remaining fairly evenly matched. Maester Eon's account of the War of the Ninepenny Kings, one of the finest of its kind, is a splendid source for the details of the fighting, with its many battles on land, sea, and notable feats of arms. Lord Ormond Baratheon, the Westerosi commander, was amongst the first notable participants to perish, cut down by the hand of Meleys the Monstrous himself. He died in the arms of his son and heir, Steffon Baratheon. There were many other notable losses as well. Sir Jason Lannister was killed on Bloodstone, with Lord Roger Rayne left to lead the remaining Westermen to several victories. Command of the Targaryen host passed to the new young Lord Commander of the Kingsguard, Sir Gerald Hightower, known to the history books as the White Bull. Hightower and his men were hard-pressed for a time, but as the war hung in the balance, as the Ninepenny Kings grew in confidence, a young knight from the Dornish marches, named Sir Barristan Selmy, slew Meleys the Monstrous in single combat. Barristan cut a bloody path through the entirety of the Golden Company to reach Meleys, to the shock of all on both sides of the battle. In doing this, Sir Barristan won the undying renown forever earning his place in the history books, deciding the issue of the War of the Ninepenny Kings in a single stroke. The remainder of the Ninepenny Kings had little or no interest in Westeros with Meleys dead, and soon fell back to their own domains across the Narrow Sea. Meleys the Monstrous was the fifth and last Blackfyre pretender. With his death, the curse that Aegon the Unworthy had inflicted upon the Seven Kingdoms by giving the Sword of Kings to his bastard son was finally ended, at least through the known male line. Who knows the true extent of House Blackfyre's time in Essos? Maybe out there somewhere across the Narrow Sea, the blood of the Black Dragon still flows. Half a year of hard fighting remained before the Stepstones and the disputed lands were free from the remaining Band of Nine, and it would be a further 6 years before Aerys, the tyrant of Tyrosh, was poisoned by his queen. The Archon of Tyrosh was restored. For the Seven Kingdoms, it had been a grand victory, though not without significant cost of lives or suffering. The realm thereafter returned to peace, though never strong. The impact the War of the Ninepenny Kings had on Westeros cannot be understated. It was through this war the pieces began to move into place that allowed for the downfall of House Targaryen to happen the way it did. Many great lords and heirs were killed. Friendships and bonds between men and houses were formed that would transcend generations. The aftermath of the fighting is almost as important, if not more so, than the war itself. With Ormond Baratheon slain, Steffon Baratheon became the new Lord of Storm's End. He'd remained close friends with both Prince Aerys Targaryen and Sir Tywin Lannister, whom both fought in the war alongside him. Tywin himself was a new-made knight, received the honour of giving Prince Aerys his spurs after fighting gallantly in the war. This all began to lead to Tywin becoming bitter and hardened, particularly against his ineffectual lord father, Tytos, who had not taken part in the war, rather remaining home with his mistresses. Those tensions soon erupted into the Rain Tarback Revolt of 261 AC, resulting in the utter destruction of the Reigns of Castamere, becoming part of Tywin Lannister's legend. It should also be noted that Lord Hoster Tully became acquainted with a small petty lord from the Fingers, a Lord Baelish, during the war, where they fought side by side. Lord Baelish did some kind of service for Hoster, which was later repaid when Hoster accepted to take Baelish's son, Peter, as a ward in Riverrun, with the very same Peter Baelish eventually rising the ranks, becoming Master of Coin and an important part in court life in years to come. Jon Arryn also became acquainted with Lord Rickard Stark of Winterfell and Lord Steffon Baratheon of Storm's End, which resulted in several years later Jon taking their sons Eddard Stark and Robert Baratheon as his wards at the Eyrie in the Vale, as well as in time setting up a series of marriage pacts between House Arryn, Stark, Tully and Baratheon that would in time become a vital part of the history of Westeros in a way no man could have foreseen at the time. Sir Barristan Selmy, when the next opening presented itself, was named to the Kingsguard, an opening he accepted despite being the heir to Harvest Hall and being betrothed at the time. Barristan, for his service in the Kingsguard and actions during the War of the Ninepenny Kings, would be counted among the best and legendary knights to ever wear the white cloak. The War of the Ninepenny Kings, while ideally would have been avoided, did do a lot more good than harm in the wider context of Westeros. No one wants a war. They are costly in both terms of money and in lives. But the biggest issue that wars in fact cause is political instability. How a king chooses to face a conflict can either bring the realm together or cause pre-existing divisions to widen even more. By the time of the attempted invasion of Meleys Blackfyre and the Band of Nine, it had been 64 years since Daemon the First Blackfyre rose up against his brother King Daeron II in the First Blackfyre Rebellion, the most divisive war in the history of Westeros, other than the Dance of the Dragons. For years after, the wounds Daemon Blackfyre and Bitterstill had left would fester, with deep-rooted resentment from both sides. Despite a Targaryen victory in the war, it did little to soften the resolve of those who had fought for the Black Dragon, and who had suffered punishment as a result of their support, in the form of lands and titles being stripped, and wealth taken, and children made hostages. The truth is, by the year 260 AC, after 64 years and several generations, new lords had risen to power, and much of that anger and enmity dissipated. Thus, rather than the long-standing Blackfyre supporters rallying to the banner of Meleys, lords and houses from up and down Westeros instead rallied behind House Targaryen in a united front. The War of the Ninepenny Kings brought the lords of Westeros together as one in a way that had never happened before. For the first time in centuries, the great houses were all on the same page, and through it, friendships and relationships fostered that would define the next 50 years of Westeros. But another impactful consequence of the war that can equally be seen as impacting Westeros positively and negatively is the inevitable deaths of important people. For example, lords. Much of the hatred on both sides of the Blackfyre rebellions were deep-rooted on a personal level by the generation who lived through it, with several lords dying in 260 AC fighting in the Stepstones. For many houses, it meant the rise of a new young lord that would wipe the slate clean of the ills of the past. But there are also, of course, negative aspects to this, with these young new lords, in a lot of cases, being unknown entities entering the political fray with a fresh outlook that could often undermine the establishment. Thus, the War of the Ninepenny Kings would leave its fingerprints on Westeros for years to come. While of course it's true that unlike his father and grandfather during their respective wars, King Jaehaerys II remained in King's Landing for the campaign in the Stepstones, he still managed to provide a unifying banner for his lords to rally to. His son and heir, Prince Aerys, fought valiantly in the Stepstones. Only 16 years of age, the young Prince of Dragonstone fought alongside his two best friends, the heir to Storm's End, Steffon Baratheon, and the heir to Casterly Rock, Tywin Lannister. It is said that the three young men were inseparable, with the War of the Ninepenny Kings only strengthening their bond further. In fact, many lords saw reassurance in Aerys, Tywin and Steffon that the future for Westeros would be one of peace and prosperity in the hands of Aerys, with such strong future lords as his close advisors and confidants. In fact, Aerys is said to have fought so well during the War of the Ninepenny Kings it impressed many seasoned knights, and in doing so he earned his spurs. Of all the great knights present in the Stepstones at the time, the likes of Barristan the Bold and Sir Gerald Hightower, the prince instead chose his close friend, Tywin Lannister, to dub him a knight. As the war came to an end, and lords returned to their lands, there was a sense of confidence that one day Prince Aerys would make a great king if he had time to grow and develop, which is sadly not something he was given. The realm was at peace with the Blackfyre threat vanquished once and for all, and a new era of peace and growth looked to be taking shape under the watchful guidance of King Jaehaerys II. Many hoped it would be a reign as long as his predecessor and namesake, but it would not be, and some of the larger issues of his father, King Aegon V's reign, began to surface, with the voices of the lords now stronger than ever, thanks to the relationships forged during the War of the Ninepenny Kings. Though never strong, Jaehaerys proved to be a capable king. Despite this new unified front from many of his lords, he did manage to restore order to the Seven Kingdoms, reconciling many of the great houses who had been unhappy with the Iron Throne because of King Aegon V's attempts of reforms. At the cost of this reconciliation, however, were some of these very reforms that had been his father's legacy. In the end, King Jaehaerys II's reign proved to be a short one, in fact one of the shortest in the history of Westeros, beside the likes of King Aegon II and Viserys I. In 262 AC, King Jaehaerys II suddenly and quickly sickened and died abed of a short illness. Court records tell us that the king had begun complaining of a sudden shortness of breath. He was only 37 years of age at his death and had sat the Iron Throne for scarce 3 years. While there seems no indication that foul play could have been involved in the king's death, how quickly he went from a healthy young man to his deathbed did raise eyebrows at the time. We will never know what truly ended Jaehaerys' life so suddenly. But what we do know is that with his early death, it left the ranks of the House Targaryen, in terms of family members, starting to dwindle. The Iron Throne would pass to his eldest son, the 19-year-old Prince Aerys, now King Aerys II Targaryen. While most were shocked at the sudden death of the king at such a young age, there was still relative calm across the realm as the young king took the throne, given all the promise he had shown thus far. For a while, that promise would shine through, but who could have known at the time the chaos that would soon envelop Westeros once again, this time changing the very fabric of the Seven Kingdoms itself. The downfall of House Targaryen had finally come, and it would be at the hands of this promising young King Aerys II, or as the history books would forever remember him, the Mad King.